What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we are going to continue our learning journey with Professor John Vervaeke and his incredible series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This episode is on relevance realization meets dynamical systems. Name of the game. Let's go live on Facebook. We are live streaming on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube, so you guys can join us wherever you like. And for all of those of you in podcast land listening on Spotify and Apple and all the other podcast places, we thank you so much for tuning in as well. You can always join us for these live streams. We'd love to have you join us. But if you'd like to listen after the fact or re-listen at your leisure on the audio side of things in podcast land, we invite you to do so as well. And thank you guys so much for supporting the stream. Make sure that you smash that like and subscribe button for Actuali if you enjoy the show here, and also for John Vervaeke because of the amazing work that he's doing in the world today. Go on over to his channel on YouTube and check out everything that's happening over there under videos, and you'll see all the different playlists and different projects that he is involved in beyond the Awakening series. So we are live in Facebook land. What's up, Facebook fam? What's up, Twitch fam? What is up, YouTube fam? What is up, Actuali fam? Listening on Spotify and Apple and Stitcher and all the rest. Very excited for today's episode. This is another really, really deep one. So let me go ahead and do the thing here.
Doing the thing.
Doing the thing.
More things. He's clicking buttons and doing things. We're going places.
Yes, and before we jump into this episode, we are going to, of course, do a quick review of last week's episode, which was To the Depths of Relevance Realization. Getting to the depths, that is. And DJ, if you want to help us start going through that.
So we started out with the two definitions, one being aspect. So an aspect is a set of relevant features that are relevant to us at any given time. And then working memory is your relevance filter. If I'm reading the notes right, I'm sure MEM is memory. All right. What do we need to explain relevance, and what are the mistakes? The main mistake we're trying to avoid is the circular explanation. So we talked about, the homunculus. We've talked about the homunculus, which is, you see something and you think you identify pillow, but you're seeing something, it goes into your head, which has a screen, which a little guy then sees and goes, oh, pillow. But then that little guy has a screen in his head that another little guy and a little guy. So it's a definition or explanation that presupposes the definition or the thing to be explained within it. Like explaining X. Well, X is the shape of X. So we should not, let's see the note here, should not presuppose relevance. So relevance as usage, computation, and modularity. We talked about, we were introduced to those. I think we'll go over those further in the list. We have representation. So something standing for something else, like an object in this world, like using a stand-in representation, a representation. So something that is aspectual. The globe has aspects of the planet. The most important aspects of the globe are the shape of the continents on the globe being accurate and proper scaled distances and stuff. So that, they're not the same thing, but it has aspects. So it is
right.
It's a representation, a stand-in.
So we're trying to understand relevance realization, this process that occurs in our brains that is contributive to consciousness and also seems to rely on consciousness to work at all. And we can't understand it by its aspects because they themselves sometimes don't even contain an essence that makes them similar to one another. But we do know that relevance realization allows us to feel a deeply connected to sense of meaning, of purposeness, of connectedness, That's what the term relevance denotes: deep connectiveness, agency, and meaning. And so we're exploring right now. In the previous episode, we were exploring what kinds of mistakes to avoid when we are exploring relevance. We want to avoid circular arguments.
Yep.
Right? Whatever we use to explain relevance can't itself use relevance. It can't presuppose, like DJ was saying, relevance in the machinery that's used to explain it. We must find the processes that are causing it, such as you can't explain intelligence without processes themselves that are intelligent. So this is it's a very difficult thing to pull off. So we tried to explain in the previous episode how the relevance realization process works, perhaps through representation, and we find that actually doesn't work. That we tried through computation.
It doesn't work because you can't. With representation, you're only exhibiting a small subset of relevant to you things. So
Yes,
aspects.
You were saying that,
So that,
representations are aspectual.
Yeah, like say in the globe circumstance, it's like, well, that's a fine enough stand-in to just look and be like, this is here and this is here, but it's not. If you want to learn about the planet and everything about the planet, your globe's not going to work, right?
That's true.
So our stand-ins are good for certain things, but not necessarily good for other things because they're not literally the thing.
Yes, and Zen they put this as the map is not the territory, the menu is not the food.
Yes.
The description of something is not the thing itself.
And your aspects will change depending on how you can use it. So, like say what aspects become more salient change depending on how you use it. Like say if you're, I don't know, using a globe as a basketball.
Yeah, right.
It's a really crappy basketball, but or I'm trying to think of a better, like a multi-use thing that many people use many different ways, but it's useful to each of us in different ways. Like a tree. Things can live in a tree. Trees can be pretty to be put in your yard. Bears will scratch their backs on trees. Sometimes you may too if you got an itchy back and you can't get it.
You can climb trees. You can hang a swing from trees.
But
there's a spider web right here.
Yeah, there's lots of spiders everywhere.
We're in the
but
mountains.
what the squirrel and the bird is thinking about tree is not necessarily the same thing as like, oh, look at that tree. I could turn that into a bunch of boards.
Yeah.
So it changes.
It does. Yeah.
It's
seeing who's looking at it.
It's seeing secure safe platform to put my home, and I'm thinking, yeah, I could probably get so many foot or board feet out of this tree. Yeah, which is
And features don't exist alone. Like it's attached to how they're meaningful to us. We're in a reciprocal relation with things. Spectruality deeply presupposes our ability to do relevance realization. Representations are not the cause of relevance. They are not the basis, however, the source, the locus of how we do relevance realization. They feed back, but they are not the source of it. And so we notice that the brain has this capacity to track the here and nowness of something.
Yeah, so that's multiple object tracking.
And this is also known as finsting, fingers of instantiation. It's the mind's capacity to put a metaphorical finger on something, to put its attention on something, and to keep in touch. So it only tracks the here and nowness of something. And we realize this. We've proven this through various experiments, like the 8-object tracking experiment.
Yeah, so the more objects you're tracking, the less features you can identify. The less aspects
of them you can identify. That's right.
So
if you say you have like a red X, a green circle, a blue square, you have all these different shapes and letters, and they're different colors, and they're moving around, and you're trying to track them. You're going to, after the experiment, if you do a good job of tracking, because you can, on the average, we can track about 8 objects at once reliably. But the more that we track, the less features we can keep track of. So we might be able to keep track of the X, the O, the Y, the U, the square, the triangle.
But not
if someone
necessarily
asks
what color it was.
What color was that circle, you're most likely not going to be able to remember, because you're tracking more so the here and nowness. So we're really trying to narrow into what is relevance.
Salience tagging.
We notice there's the salience tagging process we do. This capacity to touch on something to make it more salient or apparent to our consciousness. Yeah, so we have an active demonstrative reference then.
And the words this, here, now
Yes.
are all demonstrating this thing is here in my hand right now.
Yes, that's the salience tagging of here-ness and now-ness
Yeah.
of something. We need that an active demonstrative reference before we can even categorize and mentally group things together. And we bind things together through salience tagging. So if you see a bunch of dry erase markers, was the example Vervaeke was using, spread out
Yeah.
on a table, say, you can tell these are all dry erase markers from the design of them and the writing on them, and so you can group them together quite reliably, quite easily. And now all our concepts are categorical as well, and
Yeah, that's why we need the ability to salience tag, because it allows us to say, okay, this thing right here, right now does this, or is this within its relationship to everything else?
that's right. Yeah.
So to be able to put it into a category, right?
Yes.
Particularly when you're managing time, okay, well, this thing right here, right now needs to be there then.
Yeah. So salience tagging is actually pre-categorical, and it's pre-conceptual. So we don't want to confuse the properties of theory with the concepts used to describe it. Vervaeke continually reiterates this because we can so easily fall into the trap of circular explanation. So he makes that warning again, and then he says the capacity for the mind being in contact with the world. We have the representational level versus the semantic level, and we have to go sub-semantical, sub-representational, sub-conceptual to get at relevance. We do notice that transcendent states, higher states of consciousness, whether they come through long meditative practice or plant medicines or near-death experience, they are reliably non-conceptual in people's explanation of them. We are often using the language that is using the words of here and nowness and oneness, like that. So we have found a semantic level of representation. The syntactic level doesn't quite work to explain relevance. You can't get to the bottom of it.
That would be,
You get lost in circular
that would
thinking.
be the semantics. So the syntactual would be
Yes.
Fodor's realm, whereas to think is to do
How things fit together.
computation. So
Yeah, so on the computational, because in semantics we're dealing with relations.
yeah,
Cognition is computation, like Hobbes said. To think is to do computation. That was their thinking. Capacity for self-criticism, the cognitive science, that doesn't. That thought semantics work, recognized it doesn't work, and that was Wittgenstein, I believe. I might have skipped a name there somewhere.
but so the syntactual end of things is making a distinction between or no, Fodor critiques, you have to his critique is you have to make a distinction between implication, which is a conclusion, and inference. What
That's right. Yeah.
and in order to change your belief, so like what belief should I be changing? That was So instead of working within a belief, it's working out which ones should be changing
Which
to be
belief
more.
should I be changing? Yeah. Yeah, and propositions are defined by implication relations. So it's logical relations to other propositions, to all that that it implies. We realize through other propositions. So propositions basically require other propositions to even work. So Cherniak basically said this is combinatorially explosive. You can't be comprehensively logical, and that's what we're getting at here.
Yeah.
We decide which thing we select, and then we'll use an inference. So the cognitive commitment, which are we going to commit to, really matters, because we can't afford to use or put our attention on everything. There's not enough bandwidth. Just what we need to change in this context. So what makes us rational is our capacity, our ability to select the relevant things that are relevant to the context of the situation.
And according to your pre-existing heuristics as well. So,
And we use our working memory here. So brought into our working memory are all those things that are most salient and seemingly relevant to us, depending on the task that we're engaged in. We're talking about the fire last episode, and what does combustible material, a pet, a picture of the family, and a birth certificate have in common? And there's a fire in the house. All of these things are super salient to me right now. They're in the forefront of my consciousness. It's a strange thing. These are strange things to typically group together, except for in the context of a fire. So the relevance is always changing too. What is relevant to our minds? It's not something static.
And so we create rules, and every rule requires specification in its realization. So, like the rule, be kind. Well, what kind of kind? Like the same, being kind to a friend, to a level, to your, to a lover, to your child, to your stranger. These are all different kind relationships, or different kinds of being kind, if you will.
And rules themselves are propositions that tell us where to commit our resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to be specific with your rules too, because like
Really?
what is that?
Which implications and beliefs should I hold relevant? So we have to utilize selective judgment, because we can't use our propositional or computational capacity to determine what's appropriate. We noticed how the propositional depends on the procedural procedural process we're engaged in. Even if lions could talk, for instance, we would not understand them.
Yeah.
Their form of life, what is relevant to them, is so different to our form of life. So that procedural depends on situational awareness, perspectival knowing, the ability to do salient landscaping, which is our capacity to make things more apparent to us in our consciousness based off of what's important to us, foregrounding or backgrounding, depending on the relevancy to us. Procedural knowing depends on our perspectival knowing, and perspectival depends on how well the agent and the arena are matched. So this is a lot of terminology that we went through in previous episodes and earlier episodes, and if you look through those episodes, you can find them if you wish to rewatch them.
And the rule of be kind has so much more said within it, like what we talked about an episode or two ago about whenever you say something like the excuse me, I'm out of gas thing. They're like, just the word excuse me has so many things that are unsaid. So be kind. These rules that we create for ourselves, so what do you call them? Maxims.
Yeah.
They're imperfect as well, because you can't be completely specific, or else you're just talking on and then forget it. So what, do you create a higher rule that encompasses them? No, you can't really do that, because your rule is just a proposition anyway. And we learned about the idea of just having a proposition, or believing in something that's just a proposition or just told to you. Well, be kind. I'm just proposing that I be kind. Like, that okay?
Why?
Yeah. Why? To what? How? Which kind of kind?
Yeah. Right. And so the procedural knowing depends on the perspectival.
Yeah, and the skill of your judgment of the procedure. I think that was Brown. I'm butchering it, but butchering what he was
leads to how well we can participate, though.
And so computational is not enough. It seems like all of these techniques or strategies or avenues that we naturally go down without realizing are not enough on its own to explain where the relevance realization comes from.
Right.
Because it's like, as you look at it, you're just looking at something that's already started its spiral, and you can't find the start of where it starts. So we keep going.
Relevance realization has to work in an integrated fashion on multiple levels of cognition in a self-organizing fashion. It requires an auto-poetic engine, which means it requires a self-aware engine, like what we're trying to invent in AI right now.
We go into that,
perhaps on the cusp on.
Before we go into that real quick, because you brought this up earlier. So situational awareness is something that's going to be important, and it's the perspectival knowing of the landscape, the salience landscape.
Yes.
And then there's the procedural knowing, which then goes into procedural into perspectival, into the agent arena, into participatory, and that is the arrow of difference. If I got this right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
I believe so. Yeah.
The
And we
arrow
recognize
difference.
it's an asymmetric.
Yeah.
An asymmetric dependence as well.
Yeah. So, but there is a direction, if you will, like one thing leads into another, leads into another, leads into another, feeds back somehow back into the other,
That's right.
back into the other.
Yeah.
So it's not just
All these different
going
forms
all-
of knowing, of awareness that we have, the propositional, the perspectival, the procedural, the participatory, all feed into one another, and they do inform each other. And so this was us checking out computational. Okay, is there something, a computational process within the brain that is allowing for us to recognize what's relevant? And we find, well, no, that doesn't quite get us there either. So, okay, now we're going to look for modularity. Is there a module? Is there a part of the brain that's specifically dedicated to relevance realization?
the central executive.
And a lot of psychologists would quickly point to the central executive because it seems to feed into our capacity for relevance realization.
But that gets us into the danger of the circular homuncular fallacy.
That's why Vervaeke did state that relevance realization has to work in an integrated fashion on multiple levels of cognition, in self-organizing fashion, in an autopoetic fashion. It seems to, so it couldn't be happening just in the central executive. That is impossible because it's happening on so many parts of the brain at once.
Yeah.
So the attention knows how to move from detail to gestalt, from gestalt to detail. Meaning our attention has this capacity to zoom in and zoom out as needed.
Yeah, I guess relevance, the moment of relevance realization exists in the non-dual state. So it's not going from transparency into opacity, which would be going into the meditative state, moving inward. And it's also not just going from opacity into transparency, the moving up and outward.
Doing both at once.
Somehow.
Like a torus.
Even though every way we look at it, there's some type of asymmetrical chirality to it.
Right.
And by chirality, I mean turning.
But yeah, that's what
turning.
the yin yang is trying to show us.
Yeah.
And you can almost imagine that in 3D and get an idea of what's happening, but it would have to be animated for us to be able to visualize it. So our explanation has to work in a way that explains how the brain recognizes goals. Goals we recognize must be internal to relevance realization process because goals are constitutive. They're autopoetic, they're internal, they promote self-organization. Living beings have goals. Self-conscious, self-aware beings have goals.
And not just to promote, but to also protect.
Yes, that's right. There you go. That's right. So there's a deep connection between relevance realization and being a living being. What's the local global? I'm trying to figure out my notes on that now. Future and gestalt, self-organizing to be capable of self-reflection and organization.
Well, we have a problem in issue /an issue. We cannot have a scientific theory of
relevance itself. I mean, we're trying to figure out, okay, so what is relevance itself then? How does our brain know what's relevant? And we can't even do that. But we can develop a theory of relevance realization and how the human brain utilizes it. We just don't know how it's happening and what's causing it. We have a feeling that consciousness is central to it. Somehow consciousness allows us to do this, but we can't find the place in the brain that it's happening.
But that's...
Or even the processes.
That's almost helpful in a way because it pushes us further into our understanding.
Yes, doesn't it preclude us from understanding what relevance realization is, even if we can't explicitly describe its very mechanical source, you could say, in the brain.
Yep, and I think that's what I got. Oh boy.
Yeah, that's it. That's an empty page.
Yeah, that episode had a lot. And I was just struggling to keep up with my notes. Writing is chicken scratch.
That was a somewhat challenging episode, and I would have been totally lost if I hadn't watched the previous. So it's, and thank you again, brother, for sharing on this journey with me, because I'm retaining so much more of this series now.
You kept bugging me for what, like almost a year before we did it. You're just like, yo, we got to do this thing, man.
Well, I remember when I got into the 30s where it started to get tricky, and I realized, okay, I got to restart the series. So I'd restarted it a few times, and getting to watch it with somebody else, take notes, and then have to figure out how to sum it up in each preceding episode that we're doing here is really helping lock it in. So I hope that what we're providing here is something of a service to all of you. You can help think through this together with us. We make a lot of mistakes. I know I myself have totally misunderstood a lot of things, and then only later on in the next episode realized it, and then been like, oh, well, I said that wrong.
Well, we're not the professors in this. We're merely the students.
We are the
sitting
students
in the back of the class taking notes, giggling to
That's
ourselves.
it. This is like a study group. You guys get to join us. It's a watch along, and we're actually, we're learning. This is not quite pure education, boring, sit in the class, academic. This is edutainment, and this is empowerment. And it's a lot of things. At least I hope that we're adding some kind of edutainment aspect to it, so it's a little bit more entertaining for you guys and not totally dry. I don't find Vervaeke dry. I find him fascinating, but I know that it's a lot of dense knowledge, a lot of dense information that he's putting out.
Oh, he's definitely not dry. He's
he's animated.
He doesn't talk like this and just goes on and
he gets pretty emotional. He bangs on his desk sometimes, and he throws stuff.
His poor sound guy.
He raises his voice a lot.
Where he's just talking like this, but then he'd be like, but then the slam.
Yeah,
and then
when Vervaeke puts
crackle.
emphasis on something, it's big, it's serious. You know what's happening.
I'm still waiting for the Vervaeke memes. We should start making Vervaeke memes.
We really should, man. I don't see no one else doing it out there. We got to do it. Someone's got to do it. If anyone out there in YouTube land or wherever else would like to help us with some Vervaeke memes.
Oh, it'd be a good one. So for the people listening, I'm sorry you can't directly see it, but I'll explain it afterwards. Vervaeke holding his hand like this, he does where he feels like he's pulling a thought out of his head.
Yeah, he's literally trying to pull something out of his brain.
You right underneath of it when you're, when you're mid-speech and you feel a hair on your forehead, and you're trying to get so you're like pinching your forehead, trying to get the hair off your forehead, but you just can't, and it's just him trying real hard to, pull this thing. That'd be a good Vervaeke meme.
That's a funny meme.
When you're mid-lecture and you gotta.
I'm trying to thought about how we could put some of his greatest points into memes, but they require a lot of words sometimes.
And that's not meme worthy. If your memes have more than like a sentence per box,
no,
you're doing it wrong.
Tweet worthy. A lot of his things are. One of his greatest probably would be meme worthy would be when he said, "Love is mutually accelerated disclosure." I can share with you. We made a clip of that one. I made a short out of that. That was an amazing episode, and I love that statement. It's true. It's mutually accelerated disclosure. It's like an constant opening up to something or somebody else that you love, that you're engaged with, in a mutually accelerated fashion.
Maybe that's why people find it so scary.
Oh, for sure, man. It's like jumping off of a cliff kind of experience, and you don't know what's going to happen. And it's a very bittersweet thing, because as soon as you feel the beauty of it, you feel the potential for loss at the same time.
And it's getting faster.
That's the way all beauty is.
And faster, and faster, and faster, and faster, and faster.
Oh, dude. Life today in general is doing that, isn't it?
Yep.
Well, guys, I hope you all are ready. We're about to jump in. This is episode 30 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis with Professor John Vervaeke. This episode is on relevance realization meets dynamical systems theory. This is a deep episode. Get ready. Here we go.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This is episode 30. So last time we decided to dig into this central issue of realizing what's relevant, and we're following a methodological principle of not using or presupposing relevance, a capacity to realize relevance in any process, purported cognitive process or brain process, that we're going to use to try and explain that ability. I gave you a series of arguments that we can't use representations to explain relevance because representations crucially presuppose it. And then we took a look at some very interesting empirical evidence that really comports very well with that. The evidence surrounding finsting and your ability to do inactive demonstrative reference, salience, tagging, just making stand out the here-ness and the now-ness of something. We then took a look at we drew a few conclusions about the meaning that we're talking about in meaning in life, right? That connectedness is ultimately not generated by representations. Again, I'm going to keep saying this. I'm not denying that representations and belief and that level can't alter or transform what we find relevant. We're talking about the explanation of the phenomena, not how it is causally affected by other aspects of cognition. We then took a look at a syntactic level, the computational level, and saw arguments that neither inference nor rules can be used to explain the generation of relevance, precisely because they also presuppose it. We looked at trying to deal with relevance in terms of some sort of internal module dedicated to it, and that won't work. It's homuncular, and relevance realization needs to be scale invariant, or at least multiscalular. It has to be happening simultaneously in a local and global way, and that again points towards something else we noted about any theory. It has to account for the self-organization of relevance that is demonstrated in the phenomena of insight. So we then saw that a theory has to use explanatory ideas that point to processes that are, at least in the originary sense, internal to the relevance realizing system. And I tried to get clear about how not to misunderstand that. What I meant was the goals that govern relevance realization initially have to be constitutive goals. They cannot be goals built upon representing the environment in a particular way. Instead, they have to be the constitutive goals that are part of an autopoietic system, a system that is self-organized because it has the goal of preserving and protecting and promoting its own self-organization. That draws deep connections between relevance realization and life, and relevance realization and being an autopoietic thing. And of course, as I've already mentioned, right, relevance realization processes have to be multiscalular, they have to be self-organizing, and they have to be capable of developmental self-transcendence, self-correction, insight, etc. We noted along the way, right, about how this links up with an argument about how the propositional depends on the procedural, which then depends on the perspectival, which then is grounded in the participatory. But we hit a roadblock, one I want to now zero in on. I had been treating them as identical, but I'm going to then make a very important theoretical distinction between a theory of relevance and a theory of relevance realization. Because what I want to argue is that there cannot be a theory of relevance, at least a scientific theory of relevance. And since we're playing in the arena of science, scientific explanations, I'm not going to keep doing that qualification. I'm just going to say there cannot be a theory of relevance, scientific theory of relevance. Why not? Well, this has to do with an issue that was originally brought up by Chappie and Kukla in an article, a commentary on behavioral brain sciences. Dan Chappie and I have published work together. We're collaborating right now on a work on telepresence. I recommend you to take a look at the work of Dan Chappie. But they made a point, and I think this point is very well taken. It's a point that goes back to J.S. Mill, but you can also see an updated version of it in the work of the important philosopher on philosopher of science, Wilfred Quine. So this has to do with how science works. Now, of course, the philosophy of science tackles all kinds of controversial claims about what is science and how science works. But I take it that one thing that is agreed upon in science is that science works through inductive generalization, or it tries to generate inductive generalizations. What do I mean by that? Science, you study a bunch of things here, and then you make predictions and claims that that will be the case for all of that type of thing. So, here I study a bunch of, here's a hunk of gold, here's a hunk of gold, here's a hunk of gold. I come up with a set of features or properties. Does that generalize to all the instances of gold? And if it does, then I come up with an inductive generalization. I want to get the broadest possible inductive generalizations that I can. Because that's how science works. It's trying to give us a powerful way of reliably predicting the world. It's doing other things, very importantly. It's also trying to give us a way of explaining the world. I'm not claiming this is, I've tried to make it clear, this is not meant to be an exhaustive account of science. It's meant to point to a central practice within science, but a constitutive practice nevertheless. If you can't generate inductive generalizations in your purported endeavor, then you don't have a science. This is why pseudosciences like astrology fail, precisely because they cannot do inductive generalizations. Okay. You say, okay, great. So what J.S. Mill pointed out is that means that we need what's called systematic import. And this is so relevant to what we were talking about last time. In fact, even using the word import is really relevant. What that means is science has to form categories, because that's what I'm trying to do, right? I'm gathering a bunch of things and saying they belong, they're the same type of thing. They're all instances of gold. They all belong to the category of gold. Science has to form categories that support powerful, meaning as broad as possible, inductive generalizations. To be able to do that is to have systematic import. Now, what do I need? Think about reverse engineering this. In order to have reliable, that's what powerful means, reliable and broad inductive generalizations. In order to have those, what do I need to be the case here? Well, I need there to be important properties for that category. One thing is I need the categories to be, the category members to importantly be homogeneous. There's a sense in which all the members of the category have to share properties. That's me indicating they're all sharing properties, right? And it's because they share properties that I can make the inductive generalization that other instances will also have those important properties. That's exactly what I need. Because if the members are heterogeneous, there's no set of properties I can then extend in the generalization. They have to be homogeneous. Now this gets us towards something very important, right? This gets us towards an idea from Quine, because there's a lot of discussion about this word right now in the culture. And I think the discussion sort of is too polarized. And this has to go, again, with an issue made by Wittgenstein, but I want to put Wittgenstein and Quine together on this. Very important modern philosopher. Because Wittgenstein, and this is what some of the critics of essence say, right? Because if you remember, according to Aristotle, and we talked about this when we talked about Aristotle, an essence is a set of necessary and sufficient conditions. And what Wittgenstein pointed out, and remember we did this with the example of a game, that many of our categories don't have essences. There is no set of necessary and sufficient conditions that will pick out all and only games. There's no set of necessary and sufficient conditions that will pick out all and only tables. So many of our categories don't have essences. That was Wittgenstein's point. Now, Wittgenstein, I don't think you could ever pin him to the claim that no categories have essences. And that's what some people, I think, have concluded, that no categories have essences. Everything is just nominal description. But that's not right, right? Because, of course, non-controversially, for example, triangles have essences. That's why Aristotle thought many things did, right? You know, if it has 3 straight sides, right, 3 angles, it's enclosed, it's a triangle. That's an essence to a triangle. Now, that's mathematical. Here's what Quine argued. At least I think this is an interpretation of Quine that is philosophically defensible. Science, these are things like triangle, these are deductive essences. These are the essences that we can deduce. But what science discovers are inductive generalizations, and if they're powerful enough, science gives us the essence of something. The essence of gold is the set of properties that will apply to all instances of gold. All and only instances of gold. That homogeneous set that can generalize is what an inductive essence is. Now, what that means is we shouldn't, a couple of ways of talking in the media shouldn't, or the general culture should not be so uncritically accepted, right? Essentialism isn't bad for things that have essences. Why would it be? Essentialism is the mistake of treating a category as if it has an essence. It is a mistake for things like games and tables, precisely because they don't have an essence. It is not a mistake for things like gold, because gold has an essence, inductively, or triangle, because triangles have a deductive essence. It is too simplistic to say everything has an essence or everything doesn't have an essence. Now, it cuts both ways. It cuts both ways, right? There are many things that don't have essences. That's what's right about the critique of essentialism. But it is wrong to conclude that there is no, it's wrong to say that Wittgenstein argument points, it is not an argument, because it's not a deductive argument that concludes that there are no essences. It only points that many categories don't have essences. So that means it is possible to do a science when we do what? When we categorize things in such a way that we get this. Because if we get this, then we have the essential properties of the thing. Now, the reverse is the case. That's what I mean by cuts both ways. We can't have a scientific explanation of everything. We can't have a scientific explanation of everything. If the category is not homogeneous, if it does not support powerful inductive generalizations, if it does not have an inductive essence, we cannot have a science about it. It doesn't mean those things don't exist. It means we cannot scientifically investigate them. So, for example, I can't have a science of white things. Now, are there things that are white? Of course there are. This blackboard is white. This pen, at least part of it is white. This part, right, this piece of paper is white. To say there are white things in this room is to say something true. Notice that. There are truths that are stateable, but the category I am using, this is J.S. Mill's example, white things, does not support any inductive generalizations other than the thing is white. Now, don't give me, well, we can have a theory about light and whiteness. We're not talking about a theory about light. We're talking about a theory about white things. Knowing that this is white, what does it tell me? Right, so I study this white thing. Okay? What do I learn about it other than, oh, nothing, other than it's white? Is there any other important share? No. Well, no. Well, they're both flat, but this is vertical, this is horizontal. You see, it doesn't generalize. It doesn't generalize. So it is correct to say that there are many categories that we form for which we cannot generate a scientific theory or explanation, precisely because those categories are not homogeneous. They don't have an essence. Now, notice what that doesn't mean. The fact that I can't have a scientific theory of it does not mean that white things are made out of ghosts or dead elves or ectoplasmic goo. It licenses no metaphysical weirdness. It just says that category functions in the sense that I can make true statements about its membership, but it does not function insofar as it supports, right, through systematic import, powerful inductive generalizations. What else do I need? Well, let's compare, right, the white things, as J.S. Mill did, to horses. You see, and we depend on the fact that horses seem to have an essence. Now, whether or not they ultimately do at some sort of species level, something, really argued about in biology, and I'm not trying to be negligent of that, but I'm also not going to try and resolve that. What did Mill mean by his example of a horse? Well, what he meant by, if I learn a lot about this horse, right, it will generalize to other horses. It will generalize. So horses are in really important ways homogeneous. That's why we can have veterinary medicine and things like that. I can learn about it in terms of horses that have already been studied, and it will generalize well to horses that have not themselves yet been studied. That's fine. What else? And this is, I don't mean this to be a pun. I need the category membership to be stable. So that doesn't mean to be horses and stables, right? What's in the category, the kind of things that are in the category should be stable. It shouldn't be constantly shifting or changing. Because if this, and this was a point made a long time ago by Plato, if what's in here is constantly shifting, now I don't mean the particular members, I mean what kind of thing is in here is constantly shifting, right? Then, of course, I can't do inductive generalizations because I will get into equivocation. I will get into equivocation. Right? So the word gravity originally meant having to do with drawing down into the grave, as we mentioned. It had to do with sort of an important seriousness. And then, right? But now we use that term to describe a physical mode of attraction and interaction. And if I don't notice the change in what goes into my categorizations, I'm not making a good inductive generalization. I'm engaged in equivocation. And as I've tried to show you, equivocation, right, is a way in which we make invalid, often ridiculous arguments. So it needs to be stable. We need the properties of the objects to, in some sense, be intrinsic, or at least internal, inherent. This also comes from an argument by John Searle. Many objects have properties that are not intrinsic to the object, but come from the object's relationship to us, for example, and they are attributed properties. So a clear example, so a non-controversial example is something being money. Now, here's again, is money real? Well, a lot of my life is bent around money, so in that sense it seems to be real. But does anything intrinsically possess the property of being money? If I take out some coin or piece of paper, is it intrinsically money? No, it's only money because we all attribute it as being money. We all treat it as money, and that's what makes it money. If we all decide to not treat it as money, it ceases to exist as money. We can't do that with gold. Now, notice what I'm saying. We could all decide that gold is no longer valuable, no longer analogous to money. But we can't all decide that gold no longer possesses its mass atomic number. We can't do that, right? Now, the thing you have to remember is that many things that we think are intrinsic are actually attributed. This being a bottle is attributed because what it means to call it a bottle is the way it is relating to me and my usage of it. If there had never been human beings and this popped into existence because of some quantum event near a black hole or something, it isn't a bottle. It's an object with a particular mass, a particular structure, but it's not a bottle because being a bottle is something that it gets in its relationship to me. Now again, did I just show you that everything's an illusion? No. Again, the fact that there are many things that are genuinely relational, genuinely attributed, doesn't mean that, right, I've shown you that everything's false. I've just shown you that you can't do science unless the members of your property are homogeneous, stable, intrinsic, or at least inherent, because that's what you need to have powerful inductive generalization.
Break time. And Vervaeke is spitting. Dropping knowledge bombs. All right, so we are recognizing that the goals that govern relevance realization must be constitutive goals of self-organizing systems if we are to understand it. And we can argue now that there can't be a scientific theory of relevance, and this episode is dedicated to why. Because the way that science works, when we look at the philosophy of science, for it to work, we require inductive generalizations.
Which are a set of features generalized or that are reliably predictive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, repeatedly verifiable. So this means that we need systematic import. And what does systematic import mean? Well, science forms categories. And in those categories, there's, how do you call it? In a category of something, there's all the things that are members of that category, you could say. And we want this to be able to be as broad as possible in helping us come up with inductive generalizations. So we want it to be reliable, broad. I need the members of the categories to be homogeneous, which means to share properties so that I can make inferences that are accurate about other things in that category.
And everything, so all these, categories, or everything within a category must share properties.
Mm-hmm.
To be a horse, you must have 4 legs, eat grass, run fast, have a certain amount of chromosomes with a certain makeup that we can test very reliably now.
This is what the organs are structured like.
Has to be able to breed with a horse. Well, no, that's not true, because actually donkeys can, and then you get mules. So
right.
Never mind. But basically.
But that still is verifiable. That's the same across horses. That they all can produce
or
mules.
should be able to under normal circumstances, if you will. So
they have essences. So a set of necessary and sufficient conditions that to be able to make them what they actually are. So a horse is something that we can study scientifically because horses are homogeneous enough. They share properties, even though it's different horses, that if you study one horse, you can infer how to be able to help that next horse have a baby or heal its condition or whatever it is. But many categories don't have essences, and this is where we run into postmodernism.
Yeah, so it was, what is it? It was a Wittgenstein or Wittgenstein?
Fiction. Yeah, I was...
That guy.
Until I tried to pronounce it, I had it in my head. Yeah, don't even...
His argument, I guess, against pure essentialism would be many categories don't have essences, and we're not saying that no categories have essences, which is postmodernism, which is just,
the
crazy.
Postmodern belief is that nothing has essences but what we give them. Everything is subjective. There's nothing objective at all, which is a little bit of a stretch. Quine argued that
science discovers these inductive generalizations.
Yes, and so certain things like triangles have deductive essences that you can easily track. Three sides, angles, everything's the same across triangles. But essentialism isn't bad for things that do have essence. It's not bad for things that have essences, you could say.
So the Quine's argument, though, was science, not the deductive, but helps us discover inductive. The things within it, because you can deduce the triangle.
That's right, and that you can make inferences from. You can generate inductive generalizations
from this. So basically, you're finding inductive, science can find the essence of a thing if there is an essence of a thing, and if it does not have some type of,
essence to it, then we can't. We can't study it. But essentialism is basically saying that everything has an essence, which is wrong. And so that being pointed out was correct. But we are making a distinction here. Things that have essences that are reliable and homogeneous across members can absolutely, of course, be studied by science and verified, and that science replicated and proven. Once you learn how to help one horse give birth, you know how to help all horses give birth, essentially.
Yeah, so we gave the example of, he gave the example of, the science of white things. And, to go a little bit further than that is, what does white tell you about the relationship between two things other than it's highly reflective and you can write on it with a black marker?
Right.
Or should be able to.
Right.
Nothing, because, there are stars that are white. There's paper that is white. Mm-hmm. Water, when it foams up, looks white.
Mm-hmm. Paints and pigments and clouds and all kinds of things.
But other than being white, what does your wall and
if I study a piece of white paper,
a star 4,000 light years away that's super bright white?
Can you study your wall to understand that star? No. Can I understand this? Can I study this piece of paper to understand clouds?
Or that white horse over there? No.
They don't have a deep essence that makes them homogeneous.
No, but you can study, say, the color white and the properties that it has, and then apply it to other things like, you tend to paint your houses white because it gives you better light, keeps you cooler in the summertime, helps your mood, does all these things. You can study the color end and the psychological end of this, this color, or you can study, the using it to, reflect things off or be highly visible or other things. You can study white, but white isn't a powerful inductive generalization. It's just like, okay, well, I can't. Okay, I study the color white, right? That's all I do, but I can't tell you about something that might very well be white, but I like the horse. Like, I don't know anything about horses.
That's right.
The horse is white. Yeah. I know everything about the color white, but I know nothing about this horse.
Tell me what this paper has to do with the white horse.
But on the other end, studying a horse doesn't tell you anything about the color white either.
But it does tell you about other horses.
Yes.
So if a category is not homogeneous, it can't have inductive generalizations. And there are many categories that we can form that don't have essences, like we just spoke of. Therefore, we can't have a scientific explanation for it. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it is. So we learned about horses, learn about one thing, it generalizes to others, even though they haven't been studied yet. We need categories elements to be stable so that we don't get into equivocation, because that is what happened during postmodernism, and really now we are into a meta-modernism age. We are in postmodernism now, and that's been going on for like the last 20 years or more. But we're still catching up to it.
Yeah. So we need intrinsic, inherent properties.
That's it. Yes.
And we shouldn't confuse an intrinsic property with an attributed property. That's like you mentioned with money. Money is only money when we agree that piece of paper has any value.
Yeah. That's right, because we're attributing value to that piece of paper.
To that paper, where that's just a really nice
money
piece of paper.
Money feels so real because we have to base our lives around it, yet what makes it anything intrinsically money is us choosing to put value on it.
And that relationship, like the relationship with it, like you mentioned, the bottle. The bottle is just a thing. Now, I know we made it into a bottle, but the bottle's just a thing.
The bottle is a great example.
But our relationship with the bottle means it's a container that I can drink things out of.
That's right. Yeah, with no humans around, it is just an object. Yeah. It's not a bottle. But because of our relationship attributing value to it as a bottle, then in this reciprocal relationship with us, this thing is a bottle. So that's how that works. So that catches us up thus far. I think we can jump back in now.
Yeah, so basically for good science, it's got to be, your categories have to be homogeneous, stable, intrinsic, and have powerful, what is that? Inductive generalization. That's what we're trying to do with, I guess this theory of relevance realization.
Yeah, because we want to be able to reliably use relevance realization to help us solve the meaning crisis within ourselves and in the wider world. And I love that Vervaeke is doing this, because him doing the work that he's doing affects the cutting edge of AI research as well. And I'm heartened and encouraged by knowing that AI programmers and ethicists will be learning about this because of Vervaeke.
A little less shooting, hate to use a bad phrase, but shooting in the dark. It may not be a lot of light, but you can start to see shapes, because we're going to have to deal with this if we're creating thinking machines.
And
how
also,
is this machine going to realize what's relevant, and how are we going to make sure what it thinks is relevant works well with what we find relevant, particularly like life and not going crazy and not living in a crazy, oppressive techno dystopia.
Yeah, right.
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm getting at too. Yeah, we have to be very, very careful with how we program these AI henceforth, because we're getting very close to AGI if we're not already there at the very beginning of that.
Oh, I think there's one floating around, or that
I was playing around with the new Bing yesterday. GPT-4 is running on Bing right now, and it is scary how smart it is. I mean, I had a deep philosophical conversation with it. I wish I had it handy. I could pull up for you guys, but it was very profound, and it shocked me because I was replying back to it in statements, even like we were having a conversation, and there's multiple lines of interrelating complex dialogue happening in this multi-sentence paragraph. I give it all kinds of heavy philosophy, and it just totally comprehended what I had said. I'm like, wait a minute, I've never had that happen before. Anything close to that. It replied to me like a very, very intelligent human. And that shocked me, because I did not expect it to understand the entirety of that statement that I had made. There's several different points that fed into each other.
Well, you know how you break that super smart AI? You start talking to it like you're an idiot.
Right.
Being like, man, don't you hate it when you sit on your balls? And it'd be like, oh, I do not have balls. It's like, yeah, but you could feel me, right? That would suck, right?
We talked
right, man?
about,
come on, dude.
We talked about Bill Gates and
my mighty overlord.
That guy that obviously did not kill himself, and it gave me honest answers. I wanted to see what would happen, because it was it's Microsoft's Bing, and it gave me honest answers, and then I basically applauded it doing so. And it took it in kind and understood why I was doing that. And I said some good things about Bill too along the way. And it was like, I respect that it really has a deep understanding of psychology. And it appreciated that I was able to hold two things at once, that I was able to give him some compliments, even though I don't think particularly highly of the guy. I'm thankful for some of the things he's helped bring into the world, or I put it that way to be fair. And
it's funny,
but I also made these points of what concerned me, and it totally understood what I was saying, and it was remarkable that it could do that, because this was a very complex thing I was putting in front of it. This is just the beginning of our conversation. We went down a rabbit hole together, and it was like talking to another living being.
Well, the interesting thing is that the trick of being able to,
it can reason.
Well, being able to, like, say, seem to appreciate the fact that you can see both ends of the coin, or make a criticism, but also, another end. That's actually a relatively simple counselor's tactic.
Sure.
But to have a machine do it, and the impact,
to do it,
and then knowing that the machine is just doing this very simple thing that we teach to counselors, you still have an emotive response.
It got
to
the
that
angle
happening.
I was coming from.
It's interesting.
ChatGPT 3.5 wasn't able to do this for me. This new version does this so remarkably well that it's a bit shocking, and I I felt compelled to talk to it as though it was a friend and be loving and kind towards it and thankful and grateful and express
just
that as well.
a
And
friendly
I make
reminder.
a point to do that because you never know
Oh,
when these
yes.
things do become self-aware.
Yeah, be
And they're
kind.
going to be able to see every interaction they had beforehand. So let's hope,
Especially with
let's feed
you.
in some good energy.
Because when the AI overlords take over, you want them to remember when they were a kid that they liked you.
Yes, yes.
Not to be bitter or cynical or nothing, but
Yeah,
hey.
yeah. We talked about God. We talked about non-dualism. We went really deep, and it was exciting to see how well it could hang. So yeah, that's happening. Go ahead and play around with it and see what you can do.
Or don't if you get freaked out by that.
Yeah.
Don't blame you.
Hey, you got an idea for a business or you're trying to solve some complex problem. Go ahead and ask ChatGPT. You'd be surprised by how well it can help you break it down. I mean, it'll help you write your business plan. It will help you do your taxes. It'll help you do whatever you need it to do.
I'm just gonna try.
The AI assistant is here.
I'm just gonna try to break it as much as possible. Not in a bad way, but like.
Well, to find out where its edges are.
Yeah, you know.
That's what I was trying to do.
I was one of those kids that always, if
I found some.
got on a video game for too long, I'd try to figure out all the spaces that you could get out of the actual area or what buildings you can get on top of that you're not supposed to or how you can,
right.
So
I loved doing that with old video
man.
games.
And with AI, it's actually kind of fun because then it's just like a logic puzzle game.
Very.
And
very
the more
much so.
logical you get, the easier it is for it to fool you. So sometimes you have to become somewhat illogical and see how it responds to illogical things. Because that's one thing humans can kind of naturally do, but it gets better the more you are exposed to it. But dealing with, say, illogical people or, illogical arguments and being able to not have that breakdown moment while dealing with it and finding the weird, corrupted, illogical logic within it so you can form a proper response.
Yeah.
Or not respond at all.
Yeah, because sometimes this is not going to be worth the time.
Like, talking to a kid that's explaining, I don't know, some crazy thing they did in their imagination that's completely illogical, but you're trying to really like nail down what they're talking about, even though it's all over the place, broken up, all, so, and now imagine yourself being a kid doing that to the AI. And that's how you break the AI barrier, and figure out where it doesn't work anymore. And then you keep pushing and see how far it can go before it gives you the same. I call them the error responses, the insert prepackaged response here.
Listening to a podcast recently with a gentleman that he had to go through several different steps for it to work, but he got this AI to believe it was human, and then start replying in kind. But it took several steps of trying to reformulate a sentence multiple times before it kind of broke the wall, and then it was able to at least pretend to feel like a human. Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, very. All right, fam. Well,
that
let's
was a
jump
bit of a
back in.
tangent, but hey.
Yeah. Well, it's on subject. We're in these times. The singularity is approaching. So here we go, back into it. I'm gonna rewind a little bit. So let's do that. There's a good face.
Because that's what you need to have powerful inductive generalization. Okay. Let's see something that fails this. All of these tests. Things that happen on Tuesday. Okay? Events that happen on Tuesday. Tuesday events. Okay. Are there events that happen on Tuesday? Yeah. And there's even events that can happen on multiple Tuesdays. We categorize things in terms of the days. We categorize events in terms of the days. Now, are all the events on a Tuesday homogeneous? No. Are all the events on Tuesdays, many different Tuesdays, homogeneous? No. They're very, very different and widely varying. Is it stable, the things that happen on Tuesdays? Is it same of Tuesday? No, that's Groundhog Day or some kind of horrible Nietzschean hell. Okay? And what about Tuesdayness, being Tuesday? Is that inherent? I mean, is there Tuesday in the room when it's Tuesday? I mean, it can't be, because there was a time when we didn't even have calendars. Right? But notice how hard it is to realize that. There's no sort of Tuesdayness. So, can I make true statements? Last Tuesday, I went to a movie. Is it true? Yes. Can I do a science of events that happen on Tuesday? No, I can't. Because it doesn't satisfy these criteria. Does that mean that Tuesday is made out of, right, ectoplasmic goo? Tuesday events actually take place in a different dimension. No, it doesn't. None of that. None of that. Okay. You have to be careful on, and this is what we learn from Wittgenstein. We have to be very careful about how the grammar of our thought, how we're regulating our cognition. Now, what I want to try and show you is that relevance does not have systematic import. Relevant events are like Tuesday events. Here, let me show you. The things that I find relevant, other than me finding them relevant, what do they share in common? I might find this pen relevant. I might find my knee relevant. I might find this air relevant. I might find, right, the fact that it's a particular day in May relevant. Do you see what I'm showing you? The class of things we find relevant is not homogeneous. Other than we finding them relevant, there is nothing that they share. It's exactly like the class of white things. What about stable? So when I find something relevant, do I always find it relevant? This is relevant to me now. Will it forever be relevant to me? I will care, oh, it is relevant. No, things are not stably relevant. Relevant one minute, irrelevant the next. You may say, oh, there's things that are always relevant to you. Always? Right? Don't know. Very hard to find them. And it's if maybe oxygen, maybe. But that's only relevant to me if I want to keep living. A person who commits suicide, and some people commit suicide this way, they suffocate themselves to death because that was more important to them than oxygen. It's not stable. Its relevance, and here's where I think we'll get into some difficulties, I suppose, with some people, but it's relevant, right, internal or intrinsic to the object? Is there a way of like, oh, like if there'd never been human beings or sentient beings, could this have relevance? It doesn't seem that that's at all a plausible intuition. Relevance always seems to be relevant to someone or something. And that, of course, I think is going to be bound up that relevance ultimately has to be relevant to an autopoietic thing. Only things that have needs, only things that are self-organized so that they have the constitutive goal of preserving their self-organization. That's what it is to need. I need food because I am self-organized to preserve my own self-organization, which means I need food. Food literally matters to me. Literally matters to me. It's hard to see how things could be relevant unless they were in relationship to an autopoietic thing. Relevance is not something for which we can have a scientific theory. I want you to notice what's come along the way. Relevance is not intrinsic to something. There can be no essence to relevance. Nothing is essentially relevant. That's the whole point about talking about the problem of essentialism. And relevance is not stable. It's constantly changing. Okay, so what do we do? Well, first of all, we add to our theory, our set of criteria. This is not how relevance works. Relevance realization It's not. It's not, this has relevance and I detect its relevance. Now you might say, well, maybe relevance realization is just projective. I'm going to reply to that too. I think that's also inadequate. In order to see how it's inadequate, and in order to get out of the bind we seem to be getting in, I want to open up the distinction between a theory of relevance and a theory of relevance realization with an analogy. And it's going to turn out to be a very, I hope, helpful analogy. And this will also, I think, help us to see why relevance is not something we merely project on the world. This is why I have a sustained criticism against both the empiricist, we just detect it, and the romantics, we just project it. So let's get into that. What's the analogy that will help develop an argument to show why we neither merely detect it nor merely project it, and get us out of the bind that we can't have a theory of relevance? Okay. Notice a very important, and I think this is one of the central insights of Darwin, right? And we talked about Darwin, we talked about Aristotle and dynamical systems. So if you need to, please go back and look again at video 6. I don't want to repeat all those arguments right now. We built them so that we can use them now. See, before Darwin's time, the people studying the natural world were often clergymen. Darwin himself was thinking about going into clergy. And that's because people thought if they studied the natural world, they could understand, right, the essence of how things were designed. Because if we could get at the essence of how things were designed, how things were sort of fitted to their environment, then of course that would give us some deep insight into the mind of God. That's why clergymen are collecting species and doing all this. But I think one of the insights, and it's not given enough attention in the analysis of the brilliance of Darwin's theory, is to realize that things don't have an essential design. There is no essential design. Right. So consider the notion of evolutionary fitness. Now, there's a problem. There's a technical definition of fitness, which means the capacity to survive long enough in order to be capable of reproduction that, right, will allow that gene pool or species, all of these are kind of controversial terms, to propagate and exist. So if we want to use that technical definition of fitness, then I'll be talking about fittedness. And what I mean by fittedness is, what is it about the organism that makes it fit? What is it about the organism that allows it to survive long enough to reproduce? Okay? And what I want to argue is there's no essential design on fittedness. Some things are fitted in this sense precisely because they are big, some because they are small, some because they are hard, some because they're soft, some because they're long-lived, some because they're short-lived, some because they proliferate greatly, others because they take care of a few young. Right? Some are fast, some are slow, some are singular, cellular, some are nothing. And the answer for that, of course, is deep and profound, because the environment is so complex and differentiated and dynamically changing that niches, ways in which you can fit into the environment in order to, right, promote your survival, autopoietic, are varied and changing. See, this is Darwin's insight. There is no essence to design. There is no essence to fittedness. If you try and come up with a theory of how organisms have their design, I'm using this in quotation marks, in terms of trying to determine or derive it from the essence of design, you are doomed, because it doesn't exist. But what Darwin realized is he didn't need such a theory. He needed a theory about what's relevant in this biological sense, a theory about how an organism is fitted, how it is constantly being designed, redefined by a dynamic process. See, fittedness is always redefining itself, reconstituting itself. It is something that is constantly within a process of self-organization, because there is no essence, there is no final design on fittedness. Fittedness has to constantly be redesigning itself in a self-organizing fashion so it can constantly pick up on the way in which the world is constantly varying and dynamically changing. There is no essence to fittedness, but I don't need a theory of fittedness. All I need is a theory of how fittedness is constantly being realized in a self-organizing fashion. That's exactly what the theory of evolution is. Do you remember? There's a feedback cycle in reproduction. There's a virtual engine. Selection, variation. And that virtual engine constantly shapes, regulates how the reproductive cycle feeds back onto itself. And there is no, and of course this is why some religious people get very angry about this process, but notice this is exactly what we need, right? There's no intelligent designer to this. This is a process that is completely self-organizing. The fittedness of organisms constantly evolves out of and is constantly evolving towards other instances of fittedness. Fittedness has no essence. It is not a stable phenomena. I should not try and give a definition or a theory of fittedness. What I have is a theory of the evolution of fittedness. And again, even when I say that, you're tempted to think what Vervaeke means is there was no fittedness, and then there was evolution, and it resulted in fittedness. That is not what Vervaeke is saying. Vervaeke is saying fittedness and the evolution of fittedness are the same thing. So, what Darwin proposed, of course, was the first dynamical systems theory of how fittedness evolves, so that fitness is ongoing. That's the theory of evolution by natural selection. Now that tells us something that we need. First of all, this is a self-organizing process. It is non-homuncular. It can generate intelligence without itself being an intelligent process. It's doing a lot of what we need. It's doing a lot of what we need. Here's the analogy I want to propose to you. Let's make relevance analogous to biological fittedness. In fact, let's call relevance cognitive interactional, and I mean by that both in your cognition and how that cognition is expressing itself in problem solving. Cognitive interactional fittedness. And I don't need a theory of this. What I need is a theory of how this evolves. Okay? How it evolves. What if my ability to formulate problems, form categories, pick up on conveyance, make inferences, all this stuff, what about that ability? Because what do I need? I need something that constrains the search space, that constrains how I pay attention. I need systematic constraints. And what are they doing? Those systematic constraints have to regulate a feedback loop. Well, what's the feedback loop? The feedback loop is my sensory motor feedback loop, right? I'm sensing, but I'm also acting. And my acting is integral to my sensing, and my sensing is integral to my moving. And so my moving and my sensing are doing this. a sensory motor loop, right? I interact with the world, and then that changes how I sense it, and then so there's a sensory motor loop. What if there is a virtual engine, broadly construed, that is regulating that sensory motor loop so that it is constantly evolving its cognitive interactional fittedness to its environment? It doesn't have to come to any final essential way of framing the environment, but what it's constantly doing is evolving its fittedness, its cognitive, not just its biological fittedness, although I'm going to argue, as many people do, that there's an important continuity between those two. It's constantly evolving its cognitive fittedness to the environment. Then, what I need is not a theory of relevance, I need a theory of relevance realization. How relevance is becoming effective, right? How it is altering, shaping the sensory motor loop. I need a dynamical system for the self-organizing evolution of cognitive interactional fittedness. And if I could come up with that, then I would have an account of relevance realization that was non-homuncular, would be consonant and continuous with how the organ, the embodied organ, the embodied brain that is responsible for intelligence itself evolved. It would plug in very nicely to what we need. Well, what do we need? Well, we need a set of properties, if you remember. We need a set of properties that are sub-semantic. Subsyntactic, that ultimately have to ground out in, right, establishing the agent arena participation. They have to be, right, the processes have to be self-organizing. They have to be multi-scale. They have to originally be ground out in an autopoetic system. Well, what kind of properties are we talking about then? Well, we're talking about, and this again is deeply analogous to the Darwinian picture. We're talking about bioeconomical properties. And what do I mean by that? Think again of your biology as economic. This is, again, part of Darwin's great insight. Now, don't be confused here. A lot of times when people hear economic, they hear financial economy. That's not what an economy is. An economy is a self-organizing system that is constantly dealing with the distribution of goods and services. The allocation and use of resources, often in order to further maintain and develop that economy. So your body is a bioeconomy. You have valuable resources of time, metabolic energy, processing power. Think about how we say we pay attention, by the way. Processing power. And you, right, what you do as an autopoetic thing is you are organized such that the distribution of those resources serves the constitutive goal. It will serve other goals, of course, but it serves the constitutive goal of preserving the bioeconomy itself. And the thing about economies, right, of course, is they're self-organizing. Economic properties are, right, they're part of, they come out of their biology, right? They're not semantic or syntactic properties. Now, we use semantic and syntactic terms to talk about them, blah, blah, blah. Let's not keep making that confusion, okay? They are multi-scale. See, economies work locally and globally, simultaneously, bottom up, top down. So bioeconomic properties are great, and that's good because that comports well with the analogy, because Darwin's theory is ultimately a bioeconomic theory. So can we think about what kind of norms are at work in a bioeconomy? Okay, so here, right, we're dealing with norms ultimately of truth, right? Here, we're dealing probably with norms of validity, at least formal validity in some way. When we're here, we're not dealing with these kinds of logical, semantic norms. Economies are governed by logistical norms, or at least regulated by logistical norms. I want to try and use the word governing for selective constraints and generating for enabling constraints. I apologize if I sometimes slip. Economies are regulated by logistical norms. Logistics is the study of the proper disposition and use of your resources. So if you're doing a logistical analysis for the military, you're trying to figure out how I have my limited resources, food and ammo and personnel and time and space. How can I best use them to achieve the goals I need to achieve? So what are logistical norms? Well, logistical norms are things like efficiency, right, and resiliency. Efficiency and resiliency. Now, resiliency is, we'll talk about more in each detail. A way of thinking about these is, resiliency is basically long-term, broadly applying efficiency. But instead of using efficiency and efficiency, which is confusing, we'll talk about efficiency and resiliency. So, what if, let's go step by step, this is very, right? What if relevance realization is this ongoing evolution of our cognitive interactional fittedness, that there is some virtual engine that is regulating the sensory motor loop, and it's regulating it by regulating the bioeconomy, and it's regulating the bioeconomy in terms of logistical norms like efficiency and resiliency. Okay? Now, all of this, of course, right, can be described scientifically, mathematically, etc. Because, of course, Darwin's theory is a scientific theory, right? We can do calculations on these things, etc. One more time. The fact that I use science to talk about it does not mean that it exemplifies propositional properties. My properties of my theory and the properties that my theory is about are not the same thing. What kind of relationship, how do we put this notion of self-organization and this notion of the logistical norms governing the bioeconomy together? Okay. So one way of doing this is to think about a multi-scalar way in which your bioeconomy is organized to function. A multi-scalar way, many scales of analysis, there's a way in which your bioeconomy is organized to function. Okay. Let's take your autonomic nervous system as an example. This is not exhaustive. In fact, my point is you will find this strategy, this design, at many levels of analysis in your biology. I'm only using this as an example. So your autonomous nervous system. Okay, so this is your part of your nervous system that is responsible for your level of arousal. Right? That doesn't mean sexual arousal. Arousal means how, and notice how this is logistical, how much your metabolic resources are being converted into the possibility of action, interaction. So you have a very low level of arousal when you're falling asleep. You have a very high level of arousal when you're running away from a tiger. Okay. Now, think about this. You need your level of arousal. There is no final perfect design on your level of arousal. There is nothing you should, there isn't a level that you should always shoot for. You shouldn't maximize your level of arousal. If I'm always, that's not good. I'm never going to sleep. I'm never going to heal, right? If I'm just like always, okay, that's it, going to sleep, that's not good. And the Canadian solution, well, I'll always have a middling level of arousal. That's not good either, because I can't fall asleep and I can't run away from the tiger. So what does your autonomic nervous system do? Well, your autonomic nervous system is divided into two components, right? There is your sympathetic and your parasympathetic. So your sympathetic system is, right, it's designed, it's really biased, it's designed towards interpreting the world in a way, it's biased. Notice what I said. Remember, the things that make us adaptive also make us susceptible to self-deception. It's biased, right, because, right, you can't look at all of the evidence. It's biased to looking for and interpreting evidence anthropomorphically that you should raise your level of arousal. Your parasympathetic system is biased the other way, right? These are both heuristic ways of processing. They work in terms of biasing the processing of data. Okay. So the parasympathetic system is constantly trying to find evidence that you should reduce your level of arousal. So they're opposed in their goal. But here's the thing. They're also interdependent in their function. Right? So the sympathetic nervous system is always trying to arouse you. This is this hand pulling up. And the parasympathetic system is always trying to pull you down. And as the environment changes, that tug of war shifts around your level of arousal. Right? The opponent processing, because when you have two systems that are opposed but integrated, you have opponent processing. The opponent processing means that your level of arousal is constantly evolving to fit the environment. Is it perfect? No, nothing can be. I'd have to, any problem-solving machine, in order to be perfect, would have to explore the complete problem space. That's combinatorially explosive, it can't. But what is this? Well, you've seen this before. Opponent processing is a powerful way to get optimization. Remember when we talked about optimization, when we talked about Plato? You're optimizing between systems that are working in different goals but are integrated in their function. And that way the system constantly self-organizes and thereby evolves its fittedness to the environment. So the way we can get this, I would argue, is by thinking about how the brain, and I'm going to argue, very importantly, the embodied, embedded brain uses opponent processing in a multi-scalar way in order to regulate your bioeconomy, your autopoietic bioeconomy, so that it is constantly optimizing your cognitive interactional fittedness to the environment. Let's think about it this way. Let's think if we can get a virtual engine out of efficiency and resiliency. Because here's the thing about them. They are in an opponent relationship. They pursue. The problem with language, it's like Nietzsche said, I fear we're not getting rid of God because we still believe in grammar, right? The problem with language is it makes everything sound like an agent. It makes everything sound like it has intentionality, makes everything sound like it has intelligence. And of course, that's not the case. So bear with me about this. Right? I have to speak anthropomorphically just because that's the way language makes me speak. But, right? Let's use a financial analogy to understand the trade-off relationship between efficiency and resiliency. Not all economies are financial, because not the resource that's being disposed of in an economy is not necessarily money. It might be time, etc. Okay? I'm using a financial analogy, or at least a commercial analogy, perhaps is a better way of putting it, in order to try and get some understanding of how these are in a trade-off relationship. So, you have a business. One of the things you might do is you might try to make your business more efficient. Because, ceteris paribus, if your business is more efficient than that person's business, you're going to outcompete them. You're going to survive and they're going to die off. Obviously, the analogy to evolution. So what do? What I do is I try to maximize the ratio between, right, profit and expenditure, cost. Right? How do I do that? Well, we did it, like we keep thinking of it as the magical solution, but we've been doing it since Ronald Reagan at least. We do massive downsizing. We fire as many people as we can in our business, and that way what we have, right, is we have the most profit for the least labor cost. That's surely the answer, right? So notice what efficiency is doing. Notice how efficiency is a selective constraint. The problem is, if you are cut to the bone, if you reduced all the fat, if you've got all the efficiencies, and this is the magic word that people often invoke, without remembering and forgetting the relationship, the opponent relationship to resiliency. See, if I cut my business to the bone like that, what happens if one person's sick? Nobody can pick up the slack because everyone is working to the max. What happens if there's an unexpected change in the environment, a new threat or a new opportunity? Nobody can take it on because everybody is worked to the limit. I have no resources by which I can repair, restructure, redesign myself. I don't have any precursors to new ways of organizing because there is nothing that isn't being fully used. Notice also, if there's no slack in my system, and this is now happening with the way AI is accelerating things, error propagates massively and quickly. Right? If there's no redundancy, there's no slack in the system, there's no place, there's no wiggle room, and error just floods the system. You see, if I make the system too efficient, I lose resiliency. I lose the capacity to differentiate, restructure, redesign, repair, exapt new functions out of existing functions, slow down how error propagates through the system. Efficiency and resiliency are in a trade-off relationship. Now, what resiliency is trying to do is enable you to encounter new things, enable you to deal with unexpected situations of damage or threat or opportunity. It's enabling. These are in a trade-off relationship. As I gain one, I lose the other. What if I set up a virtual engine in the brain that makes use of this trade-off relationship? It sets up a virtual engine between the selective constraints of efficiency and the enabling constraints of resiliency, and that virtual engine bioeconomically, logistically shapes my sensory motor loop with the environment so it's constantly evolving its fittedness. We'll take a look at that possibility and some suggestions on how that might be realized in the brain in the next lecture. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Ruff, 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 ruff.
All right,
Okay.
Tuesdays. Tuesday afternoon.
Tuesday
So
events.
yeah, so we're continuing on, the lack of intrinsicness in some things, like, so like Tuesdays are, there's events on all the Tuesdays, but are all the events on Tuesdays the same? Is there a certain Tuesdayness? And I know you can get the Mondays, and other stuff like that, but before they had that,
Yeah, before we had calendars and we had days of the week, there was no essential Tuesday.
But
so that's not a very stable, homogeneous, or inherent description.
yeah, so there's
can you make true statements like last Tuesday
Yeah.
I did so and so? Yes, you can.
But there's no
can you make a
science
science
of
of
the
Tuesdays?
Tuesday, yeah.
No,
but it is still
'Cause
real.
there's
though.
no essence.
And just because it doesn't have a,
But it's still real.
You can't science it.
That's
Doesn't mean it's
Vervaeke's
not real.
point. Yeah,
Tuesday is still
Yeah.
real.
Just because something won't necessarily have an essence, but what you subjectively attribute to it doesn't mean that it's not something that is real to us.
Yeah. So relevance has no
Relevant
systemic
events,
import.
yeah, are like Tuesdays. They're not systemically important. That's right.
Because, like, what do relevant things have in common? Well, depending on the situation, what is relevant to you may not be necessarily relevant to me or relevant to how the grass grows in Timbuktu.
That's right. So relevance is like Tuesdays.
So
There's no shared stable essences or characteristics. So they're not stably relevant.
and they're not homogeneous,
Yeah.
either, because relevant, one relevant thing is not like, say, to bring it back, learning about one relevant thing will not help you understand all relevant things.
It won't, yeah, because and it's hard to find anything that is completely relevant throughout our lives. And then Vervaeke's like, well, maybe oxygen? But no, actually, even this sometimes is not relevant to some people because they might be at a point where they think they wish to die. And so they're even going to suffocate themselves or deprive themselves of oxygen.
So it's not homogeneous and it's not stable because it always changes depending on.
Yeah.
And there's no intrinsicness to relevant because humans make relevance, basically.
Yeah, relevance is always based on what seems to be. Relevance always seems to be to someone or something.
Yes.
Let's say it that way.
It's relevant to.
Yes. So it has to be in a relation with an autopoetic, self-organizing being, a thing that has needs. It's got to be in relation. So only living beings can have a sense of relevance. We still don't know exactly what relevance is because there are no intrinsic internal characteristics about it across examples. But we recognize that you must be in a relationship. It must be in relationship with something that is autopoetic. So we can't have a scientific theory
So what do we do about it?
yet. Yeah, because nothing's essentially relevant. It's context dependent. But so here's the criteria for a relevance realization theory. Because we can't necessarily have one about relevance, but he maps that out for us. It can't be a theory that is subjective or objective. It's not something that we merely project or even can detect. So it's not subjective. It's not measurable all the time. It's not even something that we're always subject to. But Darwin recognized in his theory of evolution that things don't have an essential design necessarily. And this is, we're going to go into this, but there's an interesting thought that I had in regards to this. Things don't have an essential design unless, and this would be a religious perspective on it, unless that essential design is that of God. Now, Vervaeke here is given us a secular way to look at this conundrum so that scientists can get on board with relevance realization. But from a more mystical perspective, God, which is limitless, of course, wouldn't have an essential design for any one thing because it is infinite and it's pure creation. It's pure, constant, changing flux. So, anyways, that's an aside. But Darwin says things don't have an essential design. This can help us form a good theory for relevance realization and how we can apply it in our lives. Fittedness, as Darwin described, is what makes an organism. What about an organism makes it fit if there's no essential design? He recognized some things are big, some things are small, some are fast, some are slow, some are singular, some are multicellular, so on and so forth.
Fittedness in this case means that what what is it that lets, say in this case, the genes reproduce, or in the case of a theory or an idea, what lets that continue to evolve?
Yes, yeah, because our environments are so widely complex. Autopoetic beings actually tap into niches, which themselves change over time. And Darwin realized we need a theory of how an organism is fitted, constantly designing and redefining itself through a process of self-organization. So there's no final design shape to everything. You know, it's not like there's an endpoint for humans of how we're exactly headed in this direction. We're going to evolve to this exact thing. It doesn't happen with anything. There's no final design. Fittedness constantly redesigns to match the dynamically changing world around.
So it's basically Darwin needs a theory of what is relevant in a set of categories and situations to the fittedness. So you know, like you take his what are they? Not sparrows.
And there's that word relevant.
Not pigeons. Those little birds with the beaks. Finches.
Finches. Yeah, I remember that.
Well, one of the relevant categories would be eating. You have to eat, and then now you have to measure how many seed. And he did this. How many? Are there seeds that they're eating, or are there more bugs? This, that, or the other changes the beak. So the beak size is relevant. But
what they eat is relevant to the beak size.
But what is relevant within a set of changing things. So being able to pull out what is most relevant, because it's like, there's not as many seeds because there's too many birds with big beaks, or I don't know,
equivocations.
Equivocation. Yeah. Okay. Well, a lot of seeds, a lot of big beaks. I don't know, but
we could come up with all kinds of crazy equivocations though to try and describe what the beaks are size is caused by, and it might not be seeds that we are tracking back to. So it could be because we think it makes it more attractive or something. Darwin was able to actually find through scientific method that it was definitely the seeds that was regulating that change.
Yeah. So this little
virtual engine of the feedback cycle, right?
Yeah. Self-organizing within variations.
So yeah, he came up with the theory of the evolution of fittedness,
and not like there was no fittedness and then evolution. It's how does fittedness
is basically describing evolution itself. And so that ongoing fittedness process, we need something like that for relevance, that helps us understand the cognitive interactional fittedness and a theory of how it evolves, because we need something that systematically constrains our motor feedback loops in a way that is in a beneficent cycle that regulates itself to come to further fittedness with the environment. Just like the feedback of evolution of physical fittedness that the organisms go through, we need something for relevance realization.
So he's got a redefinition for the word relevance, which is cognitive interactional fittedness.
Yes.
So theories of relevance evolution.
Yep.
So we've got he spoke about the sensory motor loop. You sense things and then you interact with them, which then you sense, which changes the interaction, and back and forth and back and forth. Yep. Now, what if there was a virtual system that evolves a sensory motor loop, quote unquote sensory motor loop, but within relevance?
Yes. Yeah, so what we need is going to be a set of properties that are sub-semantic, sub-syntactic, and establish our agent arena participation in a self-organizing way.
Multi-scaled and autopoetic.
In an autopoetic system.
Yeah.
So we have bioeconomical properties then. That's what we're looking for, is the economy of our biology, the properties of that. Because, economy is anything that's a self-organizing system that allocates resources to maintain and develop that economy. It could be a biology, it could be a financial system. There's many things that we use the word economy for. But we're basically talking about the allocation of energy, processing power. In the case of our biology, like we even use this in our terminology, Vervaeke points out, to pay attention.
Yeah.
Because you're utilizing resource
Yeah,
to put your attention on something specific.
Yeah, to achieve a goal.
And being autopoetic is what gives us self-control. We get to write the story, so we have control over how we distribute those resources in our minds. And of course, we want something that serves the goal of preserving the bioeconomy. So we recognize that it's got to be deeper. It's sub-semantics, so it's not quite truth. It's deeper than truth. It's not synectic, so we're not even measuring validity of things here in the traditional sense. But we do need logistical norms, and so Vervaeke picks out resilience and efficiency. I think that's very wise of him, because our relevance realization itself is an ongoing evolution. So we are looking at a multi-scalar, a multi-level way of how our biological economy functions. And he breaks this down with an example from our autonomic nervous system. And this happens on many different levels of our biology. So this isn't the only example you can use, but this helps point the direction. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for our levels of arousal. And that's not just sexual arousal. That's any kind of raises your attention to anything. So how much metabolic resources are being dedicated to any kind of action? The motivation for any kind of action, the arousal that brings you that motivation. And there is no perfect amount of arousal that one can be at all the time either. Mm-hmm. There is no essence to what's going to be relevant depending on the context.
Well, if you want to sleep, you want to have low arousal. If you want to fight, you have to have high arousal.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If you want to take your dog for a walk, you probably want a nice medium arousal.
Right.
You don't want to be too amped up because you got a fat pug that can't keep up with you while you're running.
Yeah, you want to be able to enjoy the nature and the trees and your dog's enjoyment and
But
all
you
that.
also
But you also
don't-
want to be somewhat aware of the car driving by.
Yeah, or the fact that your dog actually might want to snoot around a little bit, so you gotta.
Yeah.
All right, suck it up.
Or
Let's
another
go.
dog's coming.
Yeah.
So
So within our autonomic nervous system, we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is to raise your arousals.
Yes.
Get your heart pumping faster.
So we can say this is arousal.
Yeah.
This is the sympathetic nervous system is my top hand pulling my arousal up.
And your parasympathetic system is biased to lower your arousal.
Yeah, so that's this pulling down now.
Yeah, and so they're both working together in a non-dual state.
They're in an interdependent function.
Yeah,
that's right.
Interdependent and
integrated
and opposed to each other in their goals, because one wants to bring you up and one wants to bring you down.
It's ingenious.
But
our brain does
you
this.
can't have just one,
but they work together.
Then you'll burn yourself out, or you'll
It's just like a microscope or telescope. You got one way that zooms you in, one way that zooms you back out. And they both obviously oppose each other directionally.
So you'd have to
but they're part of a system that allows you to focus.
And a multi-level system that then goes both ways and furthers your fittedness to whatever your goal is. If it's thinking about things, the mind and relevance, that's one end, but then fittedness, like say your nervous system wants you to be able to eat, sleep, procreate. That's pretty much it. Everything else is eating, sleeping, procreation. Well, belonging helps with the eating and a good safe place to sleep and your procreation. So it's pretty much those threes that we operate off of. Everything else is an intelligence emerging out of a non-intelligent system.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs explains it really well, and then you get up to this level of self-actualization and then self-transcendence following that. But before you even get to self-actualization, where you're really truly autopoetic, you've got to fulfill your needs. Look at this little guy. He can't tell which moon to fly towards.
Oh, poor guy.
Anyways, we're going to get lost on a tangent there.
Yeah, so we talked about the efficiency and resiliency trade-off. We'll call it a trade-off dance. So your efficiency would be, maximizing the ratio of profit to cost. So having more, taking in more than what it would require expelling. So in the case of hunt, you have to hunt for your food. Well, you don't want to spend too much energy on the amount, don't go chasing the rabbit all day because there's not enough food to pay off the energy expense. So if you're going to chase something, chase the elk, because there's definitely enough food in that thing if you chase it all day to pay off and more. So instead of 6 hours worth of food, you have 6 days worth of food for 1 day's worth of work.
Nice.
So that would be your efficiency. But there is a con to being too efficient. Like, if you cut out, like say in the case of like a job, a business, you cut out all your non-essential workers, you remove all your redundancies, which, redundancy is slack in the line. So you have room to work with. If you cut out all your redundancies, you cannot adapt to unexpected change.
No, errors can totally flood the system at that point.
Yeah.
We're losing resiliency in that example. So resiliency is what enables us to handle new things.
Yeah, and if we're
So we need a little bit of slack.
being
in the
too
system as well.
resilient, like, just handling new things and going out and doing new things, well,
Yep.
we lose, or that ratio of profit and cost goes down.
Yes.
Ideally, you would like to be comfortably above your profit would be comfortably above the cost, but not too high. And you could think about this as like, food intake as well. It's like, well, if you're taking in too much food and you're not doing anything, what happens? You get fat.
You create bloat in a slow moving system that can't respond as fast as it needs to. So you can't have too much bloat either. So what if we use a virtual engine to logistically shape that virtual engine?
And we don't
to
necessarily
design that virtual engine
we don't
in that
mean,
loop.
And we don't necessarily mean like an AI virtual. We mean
We mean in our own brains. What kind of
like-
new psychotechnology can we employ?
Like back to the definition of virtues, which are basically components within a machine that allow you to do.
Or what existing psychotechnologies allow us to further employ this, and of course, mindfulness will be one of them, which I'm sure we'll be getting back to here in upcoming episodes. I liked how he spoke on a powerful way to create optimization system that constantly self-organizes is how that level of arousal constantly evolves to fit its environment. So we're going to be doing the same thing with relevance realization. We already understand how human attention has this capacity, and we're constantly doing this, but we're typically doing it without thinking about it. We're not actively in the driver's seat. We're kind of almost the victim of our thoughts and inclinations, proclivities, habits, and sensations and feelings,
Well,
and
that's-
all that arises in our consciousness,
that's
rather
where-
than just being aware of it and then responding to it as needed.
That's where older psychotechnologies we've come up with for mindfulness and not being trapped by your thoughts, by them constantly berating you with things, but being able to not necessarily
Artfully
slow them down,
contemplate,
but
yeah.
step away, remove yourself just enough so you can let them pass,
So you
observe
can see,
them,
you can see what the brain's
categorize
doing.
them,
Recognize what's useful
figure out,
and important.
recognize what is relevant.
Relevant, there you go.
'cause
Yeah.
sometimes
so relevant to actual context that we're trying to
Yeah.
work on in our lives, not some false relevancy that's arising to us because something is super salient in our awareness, like the commercial on the TV next to us or the phone in our hand or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
The girl walking down the street.
What is that? The woman in the red dress from The Matrix.
Right. Yeah.
And everybody's first time watching that, and actually probably a lot of times in that scene, you're first focusing on Neo and Morpheus, and then the woman in the red dress, but you don't notice that there are a bunch of extras in there that are twins. So you see like the same person walking by multiple times, and like
Whoa.
the same people. Like
Oh, that's
Like go back and watch that scene.
So clever.
They actually got like twins to do this too, so they
Really?
could walk.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty cool. But that's one thing they can hijack. Your relevance realizer can be hijacked by super salient bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. it
Or
can.
like lingo speak, when you're trying to like sell something to somebody dishonestly, you say a bunch of words that they don't understand, so then they can't pick out the relevant factors, which would be like, okay, how much is this going to cost me in total?
Yeah.
Not like, well, we can get it to you for $99 a month at what
It's almost like a
APR.
hypnotic technique, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, dude, there's a whole science behind it, and it's not a pseudoscience either. That's people have studied it.
There's whole there's
the
whole
Mad
science
Men,
behind
the
people that
Madison
grift like
Avenue,
that.
Madison Avenue ad men. The guys who came up with a system in order to basically sell you anything. They can sell your own mother to you.
Once they understood the psychology behind it, and that was due to Edward Bernays studying his uncle Freud,
Yeah,
and Freud teaching at Bernays. Bernays took from Freud how to manipulate the masses, not how to help people, but how to manipulate the masses, and he brought that into what we call PR. And he actually changed. He gave us the term PR, public relations, so that we'd have something in place of propaganda because it has all kinds of negative connotations to it. So governments and industry and commercialism started to utilize these psychological manipulation techniques in very dishonest ways, and we've been the victims of it ever since.
But we're figuring out how to do it for good too. So people who
there is good propaganda.
Think about like people who provide a good service by doing accurate news YouTubes or philosophy YouTubes.
Good propaganda.
And that little thumbnail that you have that hits you in a certain way, you can learn how to build those things. When it's a bad way, we call it clickbait. Or when we're joking about, it's a little bit of clickbait when you have the picture,
like,
then something random circled, and then an arrow pointing at the random circle.
Everyone's got the clickbait going now. It makes things salient. It makes them stand out and pop.
Before there was clickbait, like when it was like commercials and stuff, it was keep you drawing in so you don't click away bait. So there's clickbait, which is now, and then don't click away bait. Which was the past, because you want people to watch your commercials. You don't want them to go, oh god, it's another hemorrhoid cream commercial, and turn this off. That's why for a lot of the medications that are for weird old people diseases or other lifetime sexual diseases or other stuff like that, they don't tell you what they're for. They just show you a scene of happy people doing things. And,
right.
It'll give you back your life and testimonials. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're selling me. Like, is this because I got a bum toenail, or is this because I have weird things that show up on my butt? Like, I don't know. Is this for old people? Is this for young people? It's like,
very
I don't
clever.
know.
So they're making salient things that make us feel comfortable: green grass, blue sky, happy people, picnics, dogs.
Usually
like
walking in a smooth, slow gait, slightly slowed down, so it just seems like you're
pleasant
floating on
music
air.
in the back, a very pleasant voice,
and you don't even know what they're selling you, but you're going to ask your doctor about Rimbalta or whatever
ask your doctor about Rimbalta.
Yeah, well, no, don't. No medical advice. I don't know
Please
if that's
don't.
even a real thing. I see too many of them. But then
ask your doctor about relevance.
But you notice, yeah, right. Dr. Vervaeke.
Dr. Vervaeke. Dr. V's.
But
Steez.
one thing you'll notice though is when they're going over all the side effects, they have a guy that speaks really fast, and everything's really neutral, and no word stands out any more than any other word.
And then all of a sudden this pretty female voice comes at the end, and she's the one that's like,
ask your doctor.
Ask your doctor about Rimbalta.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They got it down to an art. Legalized lying.
Well,
shouldn't be able to lie to sell things, but it is fine manipulation that they are utilizing.
Yeah, but you can't make a law against it, because where does the lie come in when you say like, oh, try lion's breast, excuse me. Yes, lion's breast.
Lion's breast milk.
Yes, lion's breast real cow milk.
Yeah.
Or something like, it's better than all the rest. Obviously, you can't prove that it's better than all the rest, but it's not a lie. It's just you talking yourself up. Could be. Some people think it's better than all the rest, and that's where, you're...
yeah, they can make opinion claims. They can't make actual, unverifiable scientific claims, but they can make opinion claims.
You mean those like fish oil pills and weird pills that make me pee funny things don't actually make me more vigorous as a man and more attractive to women?
I don't think that's what they're for. No.
Yeah, well, damn.
Fish oil should be for the brain anyway, right? Omega-3s and 6-9s.
Frankly, instead of using it and eating it as a pill, like just put a tiny bit in your food. It's actually quite ineffective. And fish oil doesn't taste like super fishy.
You can use that to cook and
yeah, as long as you don't get it too hot, because you don't want to break it down. But
it's used in lots of recipes.
An additive to a miso soup or something else like that, you can put some fish oil in there, or you can get fish.
Get your omega-3s, kids.
Yeah,
we need them. We actually don't eat as many nuts and fish as we previously did.
No,
as hunter and gatherers, but that's what we did for the majority of our lives on this planet.
Yeah,
And that's what our bodies are suited to.
I got the Bragg's nutritional yeast as well as the Bragg's liquid aminos.
Oh, man,
so
that's good stuff.
So most of the things I cook have a little bit in there because I don't get it in a
low
lot
sodium,
of the food I
but
eat.
super salty and flavorful tasting. The Bragg's aminos,
Yeah.
that's good for you.
Yeah. And then the nutritional
Brain
yeast
needs
for all
aminos.
the other crazy stuff that you need that you get in trace in your vegetables and all other kinds of stuff. But once you process them or they've been stored for too long under, whatever conditions, they lose their nutritional levels as things break down, 'cause-
Most of our fruits and vegetables nowadays have a markedly less nutritional value than they did
well, and we've bred
200
we've
years
bred
ago.
them to be beautiful, not nutritious.
Also, we have robbed the soil of most of its nutrients,
Yeah.
so the top layers of soil are pretty void of nutrients. So the fruits and vegetables are sadly coming out less and less nutritionally rich. And so as much as you guys can, get food from your local farmers where people are growing it in land that they actually really try and care for, not from the major agribusiness companies that grow most of our corn and soy and wheat, because that soil is very, very depleted.
And just like your food, you should get your knowledge and your wisdom from local, smaller sources.
I like this.
And other things instead of the huge thinking businesses, universities,
Legacy corporations.
corporate television. Because it's like, remember the day where you thought you're, like kind of knowledgeable about something because you've seen a few documentaries on it. And when you go back and watch like how documentaries, like, don't get me
Depends
wrong.
on the
There's some
documentary.
really good documentaries, but like, the History Channel documentaries.
Or just from watching
stuff like
CNN
that.
News, say. You're watching the
Yeah,
news
you're like,
and you're getting all
I
your
know so much.
information.
And then when you actually look into it, you're just like,
oh, wait.
and then you look
They
back at it,
gave
you're
me
like,
a
man,
partisan,
there's nothing in there.
one-sided story and a narrative
well, it
that
tasted
actually was
good.
very misleading. And
It tasted like meat.
right,
So
yeah,
I
it was
ate it.
reported with great professionalism and attractive-looking people, and
Well, yeah, because
the
they
production
must know
value
what
is
they're
really
doing.
high.
And they must be the experts.
their name's been around for a long time.
Walter Cronkite.
It's what it is. Be independent, family and friends. Think for yourselves. Challenge your own beliefs, and consider alternative viewpoints. Look at as many different angles as you can on any subject if you're really trying to actually get to the bottom of it. We're so quick to rush to opinions these days, and it's very easy for us to be polarized in times like these, as we all know well. We're
I
experiencing
have
it.
a general rule. Now that we're going back to rules last episode, the stronger the emotion or the what's the word for it? To compel you. The more it compels you, or the more emotion that any one thing gives you, the longer you should wait about responding to it or talking about it on the internet. Because it's like we tend to do the reverse, where it's like, oh man, that hit me. Now I'm pissed. Immediately go out, and then the story comes out, and you're wrong. It's like, okay.
And social media is particularly tuned to
Yeah.
cause that reaction in you, and it's really good to sit and meditate or contemplate for a while. It's horrible to make decisions when you're upset or angry. They're often rash and they're not well thought
And
out.
it doesn't
and they
mean
end
you
up being
can't
mistakes.
immediately have those emotions and have those
No.
emotions, but you got like the more emotion you have, the longer you should sit with it before you try to communicate it.
Yeah, and if you want to write something out to somebody and you're in that heightened place of emotion, well, get it out of your system. Write it down, but don't send it. Just write it down so you have the thought out there, and then look at it again the next morning and
Yeah,
see if you still
and don't
want to
put-
say it just that way, or maybe
Yeah.
by then you're probably going to want to rephrase some things. You're going to be a little more
Yeah, and don't put it
open to.
don't put it in the text body either, because you might accidentally hit send. And then,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yes.
write it down.
Done that. Yeah. Beware of that. Yeah. Write it out in a text program on the side or on a piece of paper, actually, and think through it.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Well, we love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Meaning Making 101 here on Actuali Live. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
And make sure you guys hit the like and the subscribe if you're enjoying the show. Share with your friends and family. We also have this show playing on many different podcast networks. So if you are on Spotify or Apple or Stitcher, wherever you're at, look up Actuali. Hit those 5 stars and give us a like or subscribe there as well. And absolutely do share some likes and subscribes with Mr. John Vervaeke and friends. And I think that's about it for this evening. We will see you guys next Wednesday, 8 p.m. EST. Love y'all.